Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. We provide an alternative view to the common narrative. Today we're going to have a little look at Russia extending the Black Sea grain deal and its reasons for doing that and how that looks in the eyes of the rest of the world. And then also a little bit about what is happening on the battlefield, what is happening with the counter-offense at the moment. Oh, you opened your... I thought you wanted to say something.
Well, I wanted to say that.
Oh, yes.
I've got lots of things to say.
Yeah, okay. Always.
Yeah, well, the counteroffensive is a big story now because nothing is happening. So most of the commentators don't know really what to say. There are some little bit of skirmishes, positional battles, local battles, but at the end of the day,
What is happening?
it's all quiet on the Western Front. You can basically, or the Eastern Front. But it's not that serious. It's a little bit, there's nothing really to report. It's as if the counteroffensive has vanished, except in terms of words. So let's discuss it further.
Yeah, let's get right into it. Okay, let's talk a bit about the Black Sea grain deal that allows for commercial food and fertilizer, which includes ammonia, to be exported from three Ukrainian harbors or ports in the Black Sea. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the deal is? And
well, one has to go a little bit back to the beginning of the SMO. And at that stage, Ukraine sea mined, later off sea mines at the harbor in order to prevent Russia to do an amphibious attack. But in doing so, they used quite some old, unreliable sea mines. And also that prevented commercial ships that were in the harbor to actually leave Ukraine and leave the harbor. And what that has resulted in is that Ukraine couldn't export their grain. And, well, naturally, like the West is, they exploited the situation and started a huge propaganda campaign blaming Russia for the possibility of a huge worldwide hunger, and Africa is going to go hungry and millions of people are going to die, and therefore Russia's bad, bad, bad. And we all know what the usual propaganda is all about. But then Putin, who always expressed his willingness to negotiate and so on, said, but he didn't keep up the game. It was Ukrainians because they mined their port. So if the Ukrainians are prepared to demine the area, then the Russians will let them go. And that deal was basically arranged by the UN Secretary and Turkey, and then Russia and Ukraine. And then last year, about July, a deal was signed. But in the sign, there wasn't one side. And basically, the Ukrainians had to do something, or they were allowed to do the grain. And then Russia was supposed to get some benefit.
I heard that the reason Russia did not extend the grain deal is because the West did not meet certain requirements. For example, like they were supposed to reconnect the agriculture, the Russian agriculture bank to the SWIFT system. And then also they had to unblock certain ports and provide insurance for Russian ships, which were carrying Russian food naturally. And then what else? Something about
about some agricultural equipment and so on.
Yeah, parts and
but the most important one was actually the reconnection to the SWIFT.
Yeah.
So although Russia tried to do most of its transactions, especially in the oil and other resources, to switch over to the ruble or the yuan, it's very difficult for the poorer countries to do like that. And since this grain was destined for South America and Africa, these people are still dependent on banking of SWIFT, and therefore they had to pay you SWIFT, and otherwise it wouldn't have worked.
Just give us a quick idea. What is SWIFT exactly? Just a quick...
SWIFT is basically an interbank payment system. So that in South Africa, you want to buy something from Europe, you go to your bank, they transfer using the SWIFT system. It's like an internet, but just a protocol, secure protocol, in order to send the money basically to your Europe country, and from there on, that bank will then forward it to the client. And that's how a bank basically payment system is
And you
established.
need this.
Yes, it's unfortunately part. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be neutral. It's not supposed to be controlled by anybody. But as Americans are, they have basically captured all international institutions and then forced the SWIFT bank to sanction Russia and cut it off and so on, which is not supposed to happen. But
Well,
America is America; they do what they want. So in any case, the guy did the progress and so on. They did it for the first 6 months and so on, and but they only export the Ukrainian grain. The Russian side of the agreement was never basically as you stated.
And is it true that the majority of the grain never reached the poor countries?
Precisely, yes. About only 3%. I actually had a note of the countries. It was like to Ethiopia, Sudan, and Somalia, as well as Yemen and Afghanistan. They received only about 3% of all the grain that was exported.
Wow.
And 70% was actually going all to Europe, to the rich countries. And then we had even heard that a lot of the grain was, okay, it wasn't probably by ship, but it was by railways, was dumped in Poland and Romania and Hungary, and that destroyed their local production in terms of pricing. But the point here is that when Putin basically found out about this, he said, okay, the grains that are confiscated or held up in European ports, they can be delivered, if they are released, they can be delivered free of charge to the African countries. And similar also for fertilizers. So again, he played the good guy and made the food available because Russia could afford it. He made some record harvest, and so on. And that's how we went. And then after 6 months, nothing happened. And the grain was extended again for another 3 months, hoping it would change. Nothing happened. And basically now it was extended for another 3 months. So in total, it's about 12 months that was running. And in those 12 months, nothing has happened to address the needs of the Russian side of the contract. And then Russia decided, well, that's it. We're going to suspend it. But they kept the door open and said that if NATO or the West complies with the agreement on the Russian side, then they will reinstigate the grain deal. But in effect, basically, it showed you again the hypocrisy of the West. It's not the poorer countries that got the grain. It's the rich people that didn't want to have it. And some of that grain that was released last year is still in European ports. So it still hasn't been exported to the poorer countries.
The fact that Africa is becoming more known and more out there and more, what do you say, like a big target for future resources. The West decision does not really look well. It doesn't look good it's not a good image for the African people.
Yeah,
it's not.
It's like the West has operate in a very clandestine manner throughout the centuries, or 10 years? Decades. And subverted basically the rest of the world, especially poorer countries. And but that has been exposed in the last time because the West has lost its control, its hold on these smaller countries, and more it became visual and evident. And well, the West also became desperate, so they overplayed their hand. And that is what basically it's all about in Africa. Africa is actually the richest continent in the world. Resource-wise and so on. But it's the poorest country in terms of humans.
Slavery.
And the reason why it was is that we all know it's all about colonialism. Slavery. Most of the Africans were exported to America for slavery. Then we also had the colonialization and stripping of resources like we had in South Africa and Angola and Zambia and the Democratic of Congo
Congo,
and
yeah,
all
yeah.
the oil countries in the Gulf of Africa. So it was a constant exploitation of resources. And African leaders, they started to get now tired and so on about that. And they could never do something about that. They were always sort of subverted or bribed or whatever to go against their own interest. But then,
Now with Brexit,
yeah,
probably.
with now the development of the multipolarity world, finally there is
Somehow.
an alternative. And you can see it in the actions of the African leaders. They are getting a lot more robust. They are defending themselves against America. They're not doing what America tells them. I mean, Mali and so on, they even chased away the French sort of peacekeepers who supposed to help the peace and terrorists. But during the period that the French were there were three coups.
Oh, God.
So that's a matter of having peacekeeping. So those threw them out, and I believe an African country like Ghana also. I'm not sure about Ghana, but it's one of those countries that throw it out. There's now huge problems in Nigeria with Shell oil. Those I'm sure there's going to be action there as well. Shell is going to be thrown out. But so the Africans finally are raising their heads and starting to
Stand up.
Yeah, because they have an alternative. And China, yes, Russia plays a role, but the biggest one is China. The big brother. He's the big brother, and Russia is the small, fierce brother.
Oh.
So the Russia is more like laid back and very diplomatic and not disturbing the apple cart and stuff like that. So they do it very diplomatic. But the Russians are basically at this stage where they do the war and the military exercise, and Russia is much more powerful than China in terms of military. So these two together form a good pair. And China is slowly expanding their field into Africa. Russia has sent a huge, multiple political meetings or I don't know, ambassador. Well, a delegation, like a high-level delegation, Lavrov and so on, went to many African countries, and they are trying to woo the African people as well to join them, and that again gives them power. And that is the status. So they are all vying for the goodwill and the friendship of African countries, and the same is actually happening in South America. It is mostly driven by Brasilia, but Argentina also wants to join the BRICS. So they want to join, and China and Russia again are the big players in there. China has lent Argentina some money, if I remember correctly. So everywhere it's turning, where the Americans and the West was dominant throughout the last decades and millennium, not millenniums, centuries. Got to get my stuff right. And that is all now falling apart.
So this is good for Russia. I mean, now they got the favor of the African people.
Yeah, actually, this whole propaganda actually backfired. And typically, as Putin, he played a chess game, and the Western guys played like Snap or something like that because they had no strategy. But I mean, the West is desperate. They are making errors, huge errors in terms of political and
decisions. Yeah.
Why can't I get on the word?
Yeah. Struggling with your words today.
What is the law? Diplomatic. Diplomatic, yes. Diplomatic conversations or agreements. They just don't feature on that. And so again, at the beginning, the West tried to exploit it, the grain deal, in terms of propaganda. And then Russia said, well, you can take it. Open the will. And now they blame them. So now they withdraw it. The West is again blaming. But now Russia has evidence, and to show its friends and show the African nations, the South American nations, that it's not his fault. Firstly, the Russians found out that The explosive that blew up the first Kerch Bridge was transported from Odessa to, I think, Georgia via a grain deal, a ship. Now, this week again, they found a ship that went from Odessa to Turkey and then exchanged crew, about 10 Ukrainian crews. And from there on, traveled again to Rostock-on-Don, which is in, I think it's in Azov Sea, but I'm not totally sure. As the Russians actually are now very suspicious of any ships, and they thoroughly search all ships that will go to the vicinity of the Crimean Bridge.
For potential military.
Yeah, because they blew it up.
Mm.
And they found, again, some explosive residues on that ship, meaning that this ship was abusing the grain deal and shipping armaments and ammunition to Ukraine, which is a no-no. That's not how you do it. You know, you're going to play the game fairly. I mean, you are giving a grace of exporting your stuff in wartime. The enemy allows you to do it, and then you abuse the situation. It's not very kosher. But again, so Russia can say now to his Chinese friends and to the world and show, listen here, I did my best. You know, it's like the proverbial, you give a man the rope and more rope until he hangs himself. And that is what the West has done. So again, kudos for Putin and for whoever made that decision. And they are playing the game correctly. And they're winning the hearts and minds of the world. And together with the diplomatic meetings in Africa that are currently being held in Russia, I mean, there's like 50 countries, heads of state, that are going there, and Putin has explained also the peace initiative that the African countries were proposing and the support Putin gives that's all good diplomatic exercises or efforts, if you want to call it, which can have a huge benefit for Russia itself and for the multipolarity world at the end of the day. Because that's what we all are striving, to break away from the hold of the Western world.
The one polar, one world order.
Yeah, one unit of power.
Okay.
So that's how we see it, and let's see what's happening. See, the problem actually is that the Americans can never present an excuse. They can never say they're sorry if they made a mistake. They can acknowledge, they never apologize for anything. So now to go back on their own words, or like now agreeing and allowing the SWIFT, that goes against the grain of not apologizing. So that would be a huge blot on their name, or when
it's ego insult
on their ego.
Yeah, it's like a narcissistic person.
Yeah. They are narcissistic. Well, not the American people, the American government. We always talk about the American government. We don't talk about the people, because
Joe Biden. We always say everything's Joe Biden.
Yes, yeah.
So I've been hearing a lot about the Ukrainian counteroffensive, and but I don't really see anything happening right now on the battlefield. So what is happening? Tell us a little bit.
Well, you can say it's a huge disappointment. The question is, for who is it the disappointment? Is it for the West or the pro-Russian people? And well, the pro-Russian people already knew that nothing is going to come from this counteroffensive. If you just look at the numbers of before that, the Ukrainians have already had a deficit or a shortage of ammunition, shortage of artillery pieces, tanks. They were just given some tanks by the West, by Germany, France, and Britain. But it's like, 10 tanks here, 10 tanks there, 30 tanks there. That's not enough. But it's not that that everything that you hear was true. Even if you look at the Russians, pro-Russian commentators, the Ukrainian Defense Force is destroyed. This is now the third army that has been accumulated. The first army was destroyed at the beginning of the SMO. The second one was when they delivered all the ammunition and equipment from the old Soviet era countries like Poland and so on, and Slovakia and so on. And then you had the third army that's now being built up by the West. And this is supposed to be all the Ukrainian soldiers that have went to Western countries and received training. And I think these are now accumulated into a force of about 85,000 men. Now, again, it's like, when they talk about these men, they talk about it as if it's only Ukrainian army of men, soldiers that are available. And it's not. If you look back, initially Ukraine had about 200 men, 200,000 men. Then they increased to 700,000 men. Then they had about 10 or 11 different call-ups, recruitments, force recruitments, which were also exaggerated by the pro-Russians, like getting people off the streets. Yes, it did happen, but not everywhere, and not in the type of mass that they tried to incinerate. But it was because at the end of the day, it's most of the women and old people and kids have left Ukraine. So what is remaining is basically men here, mostly. And they are not allowed to leave. So they can be called up. And what I also told you last time is that, in South Africa, we have about 5,000 white people. That means women, children, old men, and men itself. And during the apartheid era, we could field an army of 1.2 million. So having 1.2 million out of a population, effective population of 5 million, then surely Ukraine out of a population of 20 million or 30 million, if you want to be conservative, you can have at least 5 million men in uniform. And I actually saw a recent article where they talked about military veterans, care, if you want to call it. And at this stage, before the war, they had about 500,000 men. They expected to increase by eight times. So we are talking about 4 million men. That's only the injured and the psychological injured soldiers, which is not everybody. So if they consider a damage, call it soldiers, of 4 million, then surely you would have had a real army of about, say, 8 million men. But, I don't agree with all the pro-Russian commentators. They always talk about, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. In any case, so we've heard a lot of the stuff. It was postponed, the counteroffensive. Then it was postponed again.
After NATO, the meeting.
Yeah, and so on. And then they were shouting for F-16s, which are supposed to have a huge learning curve, and it's going to take years to get the trains and years to learn the people training into the Panzers, German Panzers, French. Was like all excuse you can basically get until it was now, I think, the start of July, and then finally something happened. Not much. We actually had this famous video that was circulating where the first German Panzer was destroyed. And I was wondering, from a military point of view, they were driving all along a dirt road of a farm near the tree line. So maybe for bird protection, I can understand that. Then they turned off and they drove over an open field. And as they drove over a field, then the one Panzer got exploded.
Landmine.
Yeah, landmine.
Landmine.
And then another APC drove over it, and that was destroyed by a landmine. Then you saw a Bradley vehicle, and they were destroyed. And then nothing happened.
Where are the experts?
The guys all walked out of the vehicles. They all survived these landmines. They casually walked around their vehicle, checked it out, what was happening. And that was the end of the whole UI video. So how can these guys consider this as a counter-offensive?
It's
like going on a Sunday stroll. I mean, you should have first inspected by, this whole story about UIVs in this war is totally overrated. Yes, they have a huge function. Yes, they create huge benefits. It's nothing to talk about. But you still need men on the ground. You still need your special forces. In South Africa, we had, they were kenners, they were scouts. Yeah. We had our special force with scouts. They were working sometimes in groups of 1, 2, or 3 guys. They were sent into the front to penetrate enemy lines gather information visually, inspect it, and then come back. They were not combat that effective, but they were incredible tough. And you still need those type of specialized people. They go out clandestine on an extensive type of camouflage and hidden and so on, and visually scout the battlefield, the enemy, and so on. Because I mean, you got UIVs at the top. They look down. The enemy knows they are there, so they hide. So I mean, they disguise themselves. You can't see everything. And this is what that should have happened. They should have identified these minefields at that stage, or during the last 6 months, during the winter, when the Russians were creating this defensive alliance, and they should have, by satellite imaging, see what the Russians were doing, where they could have put the landmines, because there would have been some troops. It's a sort of, you can see a lot of people actually digging holes in the ground and laying the minefield. So they should have experienced, but there was no preparation really done. And at the end of the day, it was all artillery fire. And there's not. And then I saw other videos about UIVs, from UIVs, is that a certain one tank or two tanks that drive along a dirt road. The one is destroyed by probably a missile, and then the other one is driving off. That's not an attack. That's a reconnaissance type of two vehicles. Is not a counteroffensive. It's a waste. So, I looked at the fields. I'm not a general. I'm not a military expert. But all I can see is it's all open field. Apart from, they don't have aircraft, but the enemy, the Russians have aircraft, the helicopters. And helicopters can fire missiles and aircraft to do anti-armor. But you don't need fighter aircraft to eliminate those threats. You can have probably air defense system to shoot down those, protect your hardware, your armor. But it's all open field. So what are you going to do about open field? You can hide nowhere. So you have to do a frontal attack or a maneuverable attack where you take your forces and you maneuver in smaller groups and then accumulate at a certain point, and from there on, at that time you go and do that attack, concentrate attack. But then nobody does that like that. I mean, you have to. The Ukrainians have artillery. I mean, most of the casualties are by artillery. I've told you in my previous videos there was one American guy who never saw the enemy. They were only attacked by artillery. That's the only thing he experienced. There was a Ukrainian, him and his father joined it. They seldom saw, they were in Bakhmut, finally. His dad was killed. They were all artillery killed. I think he once saw Russians. And then I actually saw an article about a Russian guy that joined it voluntarily. And he did and became a blogger, and he's now writing a book. And the same thing. He mostly experienced artillery. Once he went to Bakhmut, and that's when he saw a Ukrainian soldier.
Must have been such a shock.
You go to the front. Hey, I'm going to the army. I'm going to defend my country. And
you don't see.
Who do I defend? I don't see the enemy, so I cannot defend it. You go there into a trench and so on, and then you wait for the enemy, and the enemy never comes. Yes, the artillery fire comes, yes. But
you don't know where it comes from even.
So it's a little bit
interesting,
ridiculous. But at this stage, I expect that there wouldn't be any significant counteroffensive because the weapons don't allow it. The disparity or the Russians just have too many weapons, too many artillery pieces, too much ammunition. Too many aircrafts. But by the way, just for the sake, so I just want because it's important, is that so the Ukrainians in this counteroffensive apparently suffered 26,000 men killed. But I followed the Russian military defense daily reports, and if you look at all the hardware and so on, there were probably 400 aircrafts already shot down and so on. But the Ukrainians never had that many aircrafts. So those things are inaccurate. And if I look at a lot of UIV photos and so on, where things are shot up, but then you see the tank is burning, but you see the man climbing out of the tank.
Mm.
He's not killed. So I'm a little bit very skeptical about death rate and killed in action and so on. I don't believe it. I think it's a lot lower on both sides actually. Um, but even in these, like I said, these guys who were driving in a minefield, they were all walking out. Nothing has happened.
Yeah.
And then it came actually. Why I actually mention this is that the general narrative is that the Ukrainian army was destroyed at the beginning of December. All right? Everybody told us that. Then the second one was destroyed, like I said, by when they got all the weapons from the neighboring countries. And now it's all been destroyed, the new weapons that the West is given. But how many tanks has the West given? 10 Leclercs, I think 12 Challenger tanks, I think 30, what's the German Panzers? Any case? So that makes you about 50 tanks. But according to the Russian defense minister and even Putin, 265 tanks have been, Ukrainian tanks have been destroyed.
Doesn't add
So
up.
if 50 were foreign, and they're not all foreign that destroyed, only a few Panzers were destroyed. So and you tell me that the Russians destroyed 265 tanks.
But that weren't they.
That was not supposed to be there because they were destroyed in the previous army destruction cycles. You know, it just shows you that nobody really knows what's going on. And this story that the Ukrainians are finished, that's a farce. They are not. They have still a lot of manpower. All this training, like I told last time about, is bullshit. You know, you need training if you want to do an aircraft, or you need a elongated training if you want to be a artillery commander or a sighter or that does a target. But the guy that flipping fills the ammunition has 1 week training and he knows how to fill the.
I heard they're getting underpaid.
Yeah. Some of them, some of them not even paid. Because, Ukraine is so corrupted and so on. They arrested apparently a recruiter in Odessa who was buying a huge mansion or something like in the West, in Spain. And the Ukrainians actually identified him and arrested him.
For what?
He was, no, for corruption. Because if you didn't want to be called up in the army, you have to bribe him with a couple of $1,000. And then he doesn't call you, and then he rips up your call-up paper.
What?
So that's how they usually function. Yeah, that Ukraine is corrupt, but corruption fits Biden, since the Biden family is corrupt as well.
It's a good fit.
Yeah, but in any case, coming back to the war situation, I think everybody expected a weak attack, because we all know the West doesn't deliver the amount of armor and munition to do it. And also they knew that would the Ukrainian forces commit into this attack, and the Russians give them a huge beating because of their extensive and well-prepared defensive system, that would cause basically destruction of the Ukrainian army. That will leave them open and vulnerable for a counterattack by the Russians. Now, if you take the numbers of 26,000 men, only if you take it, I believe it's a lot less. But let's say 25,000, just have that like a round number. Then there's still 60,000 men left of those 85,000, which is not the total American army, Ukrainian army. Those are only the soldiers that were trained in the Western countries. So there's 60,000 men. Those 60,000 men with the artillery and the Western tanks can inflict heavy casualties on any advancing Russian counteroffensive. And I believe the Ukrainians know that this is supposed to be coming. So now the question is, will the Russians do it or not? And in my opinion, they have to do it, because whatever they discuss in Vilnius, all the speculations that the money will dry up for Ukraine, the armament will dry up for Ukraine, the election cycle in America will have an influence, that's all nonsense. Europe will fund them, America will fund them, because it's a bipartisan type of effort. Even if you have Trump coming into the president, they won't do it. They will push for that money. Because at the end of the day, it's still an existential one for them as well. They just can't acknowledge when they are wrong. They can't admit it, so they have to do it, and that's the whole problem. So, and because in NATO, in Vilnius, they told the world that they will support Ukraine and they will make Ukraine part of NATO, and that is confirmed, and that is a no-no for the Russians. They have already stated as one of their three main objectives in Ukraine. Yeah. So they have no choice but to destroy Ukraine. How far? I don't know, but they need to do something. And there's also a lot of internal patience, lack of patience in Russia for a big offensive. So, yeah, well, things have to develop, but at this stage, from the Ukrainian side, they are a little bit dead. Not dead, physically dead, but they're not going to progress a lot on their counteroffensive. Doesn't matter what
they're waiting. It's a waiting game.
They're waiting for the attack from the Russians. They have to do that. It's just logic.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Okay, everyone, that brings us to the end of our video. Thank you for joining us. I hope you liked it. Please like, share, subscribe, and tell all your friends. We really appreciate the interaction and the feedback.
Yes, leave some comments. We like them very much.
Dad likes them a lot.
So until next Sunday.
Goodbye.
Cheers.